On today's show, how the Houston Rockets locked in the second half of the game against the New Orleans Pelicans after a pretty uninspired first half of play, the double big lineup and why it's working, Jalen Green's scoring struggles, Tari Eason starting over Jabari Smith Jr. How do we feel about that? And so much more. It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Thursdays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing. Like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube. Also subscribe to our Locked On Rockets newsletter. Would sincerely appreciate all of that support. Now, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just go to FanDuel.com. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being an everydayer. And joining us now is your weekly co-host, NBA draft enthusiast, and diehard Houston Rockets fan, Madison Moore. You can track down on Twitter at MadmanLeaks. Here to talk about the Houston Rockets' 109-97 win against the New Orleans Pelicans. They finally broke their 8-game road losing streak. And I'll tell you what, Madison, it was not an inspiring first half of basketball in this game. The Rockets were able to lock in the second half of this one and come away with the dub, in large part thanks to the big time, literally big time, double big, or I guess dare we say triple big lineups that the Rockets were trotting out there with Steven Adams, Alperen Sengun, Jabari Smith Jr. They went jumbo size. They look like they talked about it on the broadcast. They look like the Monstars out there at points against the Pelicans.
Yeah, no, I'm really happy to see MA employing these types of lineups, really switching it up on teams, and I feel like the roles are very clear what they're trying to do when they have the double big lineups out there. And I think one of the biggest issues the Rockets have had through these stretches is being able to defensive rebound, right? And having the vet like Steven Adams on the floor, really clogging up the paint, allowing Alperen and Jabari to Alperen's, I thought, been doing pretty good on the perimeter, as well as Jabari, we know can guard out there, has really just created an advantage that this Rockets team hasn't really had during their struggles. And that's with the physicality, with them packing the paint, and everybody understanding that we're closing out hard on shooters, and we have 3 backline defenders that will be able to rotate and cover for each other on drives. And I think that has created a new advantage for this Rockets team that they really needed. So I'm really enjoying these lineups and glad MA's trying them out.
Yeah, look, I mean, the first half of this game was blah, to say the least. Like, they were letting Trey Murphy get anything and everything that he wanted offensively. Now the thing is Zion is the Pel's best player, and they actually did a pretty good job holding Zion. He was 1 of 5 shooting at halftime. He was 5 of 15 by the end of the game. So even though he finished with 20 points, he went 10 of 12 at the free throw line. That's a pretty solid night containing Zion. If you can keep Zion below 25 points and on poor efficiency, I think you did a really good job slowing him down. The Rockets did that. They showed a wall at him, right? And part of that was having all that size out there, right? Having, 2 or sometimes 3 or even, 4 big bodies out there all to shade and basically kind of, again, forming that wall to stop Zion from getting free open line drives to the rim, that kind of thing. And give a lot of credit to Dillon Brooks, who did a phenomenal job there as well as the primary defender on Zion. But back to these big lineups, man, it didn't seem particularly effective when they rolled it out in the first half. And, it wasn't like last game where Ime waited until it was, third quarter or whatever, and then kind of went break in case of emergency and rolled it out because he just wanted to throw some kind of a curveball out there. He went to it early in the game. He went to it in the first quarter of this game is when we saw the double big lineup in action. And over the course of this entire game, I had to do the math manually, so I apologize if it's wrong, but the Sengun Adams double big lineups were across the board in every lineup that featured those two guys in particular across this 48-minute basketball game. They were plus 18 in those minutes with those two guys on the floor. And it's the combination of that added size, right? The physicality that you highlighted, the extra rebounding that's on the floor. But it also provides kind of like, it's just a mismatch nightmare for opposing teams where there's very few teams, and the Pelicans are an obvious example of it. Willie Green had to stop playing the lineups that he wanted to play. He had to start playing double bigs. He started having to put out Misi and Rockets legend Kelly Olynyk at the same time to be able to mirror the size and basically trying to slow those two guys down. And it allows kind of that offensive edge for Sengun, because you can't leave Steven Adams, you can't park a wing or anything on Steven Adams, or he's going to get every rebound under the sun. So it gives Sengun even more of an offensive advantage going up against oftentimes smaller players.
Yeah, I think honestly, and in the first half, none of the first half honestly was good basketball. But I think, like you said, they employed the big lineup early in the first half. And I think it didn't get a lot of great results just because the Rockets were turning the ball over too much.
Yeah.
And New Orleans was getting up and down the floor. And so we were never really set to actually, play a good stretch of defensive basketball. But once the Rockets cleaned up all the turnovers and really started initiating primarily through Jalen or Alp only, I think the Rockets started to generate good shots, play in the half court, and their defense got set. And when they had the bigs out there, they closed hard, they switched well. And I think a lot of the mistakes we have, because the Rockets are still making mistakes with their switches. The guys are backdoor cutting them. I think that it really is what got New Orleans going, is the turnovers and the backdoor cuts. I think Jabari, Alp, and Steven Adams don't miss rotations very often, right? They're pretty on point, even though they may get mismatched, switched out on the perimeter. They still don't miss those rotations, and also they can employ some zone defense with those bigs that really is effective, where their length covers certain areas of the floor that really can muck up a team, especially if they're not shooting the ball well. So I thought the Rockets got out and defended the three pretty well when those lineups were in, and the paint was, like you said, a mismatch and a major advantage for this team. And I'm glad Ime is able to pull those types of lineups out for the Rockets.
Yeah, the zone defense, when you have all that size and length out there, and guys are just responsible for guarding like that one little quadrant of the floor that they're in, I think it kind of neutralizes some of the defensive struggles that we have seen from Steven Adams at times, because, Alp and Adams, they are more traditional bigs, right? They can get, left out on an island if they get caught on a switch on the perimeter. And we've seen that at times where Adams gets caught out and then isolated on and gets blown by. And when he's playing zone, you get all the benefits of Steven Adams and none of kind of maybe the defensive drawbacks of having him out there. And to your point, Jabari and Alp are both agile enough, they're quick enough on their feet, and can slide their feet enough defensively to be there, kind of in those corners as well. And even the funny thing is, there were even points where primarily the Rockets were running like a 2-3 zone when they did run zone in this game, but there were even points where like Alp would get stuck at the top of like the 2-3 zone in one of the top quadrants, and he was still doing okay. Like he still handled himself. I remember there were like a couple possessions where in the lineup where they had Reed out there with them, Reed was down in the bottom corner. I'm like, that's not where you're supposed to be. Like that's not your spot in the zone. But you just gotta pick up the nearest man and kind of basically form the shell of that zone defense as quickly as possible to get into your true half court defensive identity. And sometimes that means, okay, I'm in the spot, Alp, you're up top. Sorry, you're going to have to guard that part of the zone. And they did an admirable job doing that. So it really feels like this is something that's here to stay for this Rockets team, something that we're probably going to see more and more of as the season progresses. And I like it. I think it's good. I think it's good for this Rockets team to have kind of a curveball or a little secret weapon that they can throw out there. And Adams has been so impactful in the minutes that he's played so far this season, backing up Alp. It makes a lot of sense to me to have him, be able to get him a little bit more minutes in conjunction with Alperen Sengun instead of just getting whatever's left over after Alp's, 32, 35 minutes a night, what have you. But coming up, we want to get into some of the specifics from this game. We'll talk about some of the offensive experimentation that the Rockets are using with no Fred VanVleet in the lineup, as well as Jalen Green's struggles and Tari Eason starting over Jabari Smith Jr. Is this going to be a permanent trend? We're going to get there in just one moment. first, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Look, basketball season is heating up. The playoffs are right around the corner, and there's no better way to get in on the action than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With Prize Picks, you just pick more or less on at least 2 player projections for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. It's so easy to use, available in over 30 states, and lets you mix and match projections across different sports. This week, I'm selecting Alperen Sengun for more than 25 points, and then Jalen Green for more than 5 3-pointers. It's really that simple. Download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly after your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, Madison, looking at kind of how this game progressed, one of the things that we are seeing with this Rockets team, and even though they got the win, I think they got the win largely on the backs of their defense. Again, they gave up 34 points in that first quarter to the Pelicans. They didn't have any answer for Trey Murphy in that first frame. But then they tightened down. They held the Pelicans to just 63 points over the rest of the 3 quarters of play, including a 15-point third quarter, which is really where they kind of ran away with the game there at the end of the third. But offensively, still some question marks for this team, right? They still look a little lost, a little disjointed at times. And some of that is, in the first half, it really felt like they were, the turnovers were killing them. They were playing in a crowd too much, right? Not making simple, easy reads to get open shots. And it feels like a big part of that is because they still don't really have like a true leader out there for the offense without Fred VanVleet. When Fred's out there, again, he's like the safety net for everybody. Everybody knows, okay, we need a good set. Give the ball to Fred. He'll get us in our actions. Cool. Whereas now, we've seen growth from him, we've seen growth from Jalen, and those guys have taken serious steps forward running the offense without Fred. But it's also just kind of like, okay, Dillon's going to do something. Now Tari's going to do something. And now Reed's in the game, and he's trying to run and it just doesn't feel like they have that steadying hand available to slow things down offensively and get good, high-quality looks.
Yeah, the offense is disjointed. It has a lack of connectedness, and that lack of connectiveness is, of course, due to Fred being out. But it will really help if all of the guys just move the ball better as a collective. You know what I mean? I think that's one of the biggest issues is once the ball is swung, because you're not always going to create the initial advantage, but once the ball is swung, for it to pop quickly, decisions being made quickly and often. And what we often see is, where we get these experimental, these experimental things that Ime is doing with letting Amon run a lot more point guard and a lot more initiation. But teams can pack the paint on him. They know exactly what they want to do. And we often get down in the shot clock and get a really bad forced up shot or a forced turnover in those ways. And guys just don't have the patience and the poise. And so I would like to see this Rockets team, number one, understand what they're trying to do in these sets. They're too disjointed in the way that they're just going out and playing like you were saying. Get to your bread and butter. You want empty corner pick and rolls with Jalen and Alp because that initiates all the easy reads, and that's how they got started with their offense in the second half with letting Jalen initiate. But for some reason, that didn't seem to be a focal point in the first half. And we saw a lot of Tari Eason initiating offense and catching and going and driving into crowds and trying to make a play. And those things are just not a part of his skill set yet, right? And so as they're trying to experiment through these things, we also see a little bit of Reed Shepherd, which I actually think is the one guy that we should let get the ball a little bit more, because as long as he's able to dribble and not turn the ball over at the top of the key, he's actually one of the few players on this team who's able to make a skip pass and pass a guy open and move guys with his eyes. And so I really like for Reed to get some of those experimental reps rather not, forcing it so much with Amen, because he's such a one-dimensional player when he has to go to the basket. And teams are, when we are running it so much through Amen, it's easy for them to really load up on him. And then they know we just need to get back out to shooters, and they force them into bad turnovers. And so I think this team really needs to identify What are you trying to get into? What are you looking for? And really make the quick and easy first pass instead of driving into crowds and really bogging down into the shot clock. It really is hurting this team.
Yeah, look, this Rockets team is not a very good passing team. That's one of the sacrifices that they kind of made in order to kind of artificially cut down on those turnovers, which was one of Ime Udoka's goals when he came in last year was, hey, all right, we're going to stop turning the ball over. But kind of the unfortunate side effect of that is they don't move the ball enough. They are dead last in the NBA in assist percentage by a wide margin at 54.4%. That is almost 4 percentage points below the second to last team, which is the Philadelphia 76ers at 58.7%. And then they're also dead last in the NBA in just flat out assists per game, sitting at, what was it? 22.7 assists per contest. By comparison, the Nuggets lead the NBA with 31.1 assists per game. And then the best assist percentage team in the NBA is actually the Golden State Warriors at 71% assist percentage. So 71% of their shots assisted on. That's definitely an area that it feels like the Rockets could grow in. And it's so weird because it feels like they have so many willing and capable passers up and down the roster. And this is where you get into some of the criticism, which at this point I think is warranted and fair for Ime Udoka, that there is very little creativity within this Houston Rockets offense, very little off-ball movement, very little motion, very little cutting. And again, I don't know the inner workings. I don't know the behind the scenes. You know, Ime clearly empowers each one of his players to take some of these, you know, again, the equal opportunity offense. And if you think you have a favorable matchup or you have a mismatch advantage against a certain player, that's where we see, you know, those Tari Eason drives downhill, or Dillon Brooks posting up a smaller guy, or Jalen Green taking a big, you know, off the bounce and driving and getting to the rim. And that works sometimes, but it's also just, I would love to see this team really adopt more of a team brand of basketball. And when they do that, they share the ball a lot better in the second half of this game. They had so many beautiful assists in this game. Alperen Sengun finished the night with 8 assists. Jalen Green finished with 8 assists. Tari Eason had 4 dimes in there. Steven Adams had 6 assists in this game. So they actually did a decent job, contrary to how they usually play. They did a decent job sharing the ball in this game. It just doesn't feel like a common occurrence for them to move the basketball as much as they did in this one.
It's all about the initiation. Once the Rockets actually initiate the offense and get the ball swinging and get the defense in rotation, they're actually pretty decent. But like I said, like we said, in the first half, we had these other guys initiating these sets, and they did not do a good job. And that's because they're unable to force the issue because they're not triple threat players like Ivan Thompson. And then you get a couple bad turnovers in a row. Now the guys are out and running and they're in rhythm. New Orleans is in rhythm. Your defense is not set, and it hurts you on both ends of the floor. And so, like I said, I mean, I think this team would do well to run more offense through Jalen Green. And I know that New Orleans did a very good job of shadowing him, keeping the ball out of his hands. There was almost no times where Jalen could just grab the ball and walk it up the court after a rebound. I mean, Jose Alvarado was very connected to Jalen, but that's where coaching comes in with Ime. You have to design some backdoor cuts for Jalen so he can get open and keep the defense honest for those. So he's now able to come off on those dribble handoffs and initiate your offense like he did in the second half. I did see a little bit more of, more intentional screening to free Jalen up in that second half. And I thought that kept the Rockets in rhythm, and a lot of hockey assists. And that's how we get those, Steven Adams 6 assists. And because now the defense is in rotation and guys can make passes when there are opportunities out there. But right now, I think the Rockets are getting a little better, but it's not good enough. And I would like Ime to have more direction in what they need to do. I don't know if he's really just trying to grow those other skill sets for the other players, but right now it's really hurting the team. And I don't know if we have the bandwidth to let them grow in that way.
Coming up, I want to talk a little bit more about Jalen Green's performance in particular, as well as Tari Eason starting over Jabari Smith Jr. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? How do we feel about that? And final thoughts from this game. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. Using FanDuel's live betting feature is awesome because it keeps every moment of the game exciting, whether you're backing your team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three-pointer. Never feel like you missed your chance. Plus, the app is so easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just go to FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. You know, Madison, you bring up a really great point about Jalen Green and kind of his role in this game. First off, I want to give Jalen a lot of credit because, you know, in games past, maybe even earlier this season, seasons past, whatever, a game where he gets completely taken out of the game offensively by not scoring the basketball, you wouldn't be able to see Jalen make an impact the way that he did in this one, right? Finishing with 8 assists, only a couple turnovers. Yes, he had that really bad sequence where the Rockets, they failed to get the offensive or the defensive rebound because Jalen and Jabari both went up for the same defensive rebound, and Kelly Olynyk got it over the top of both of them because neither one of them were yelling same, and so they both lost the ball. Olynyk got the offensive putback, and then immediately afterwards, we didn't even see it on camera because the Space City Home Network crew they cut away from the feed, but we came back and we missed a Grand Theft Alvarado moment where I'm guessing Jalen was the one who stepped out of bounds to inbound the ball to LP, and then it was a lazy pass, and so then Alvarado swooped in, stole the pass and kicked it back out for a wide open three-pointer, and that ballooned the lead up to 10 in that second quarter. And Ime was pissed. He immediately called a timeout. Look, Jalen had the 2 turnovers, but they came in the first half. He cleaned things up. He had 0 turnovers in the second half, finished with 8 assists. I wonder, I think it was maybe too little too late, but from Ime to, use some of those screens, trying to free up Jalen more in the second half. I wonder what you think could be done differently to get Jalen going a little bit more offensively early in some of these games, because it kind of feels like if Jalen doesn't get it going offensively by the end of the first half, it feels like it's really hard for him to find his rhythm in the second half of some of these games that have happened as of late, where he walks away with a game where you look at the final box score and you're like, man, Jalen really struggled, or he had a quiet night, and he's still finding other ways to be impactful, but it's really tough when one of your best offensive weapons gets completely taken out of the game in the first half.
Yeah, I think they waited to the second half to really scheme up some stuff to get Jalen free. Like we talked about some things in the second segment about, really setting them up for back screens since they were overplaying Jalen, really denying him the ball, understanding that we don't have a ball handler. And so, yes, I agree. But also Jalen just has to be more aggressive and more, I say he has to show more of that alpha mentality. I do think he let the game come to himself. He did have opportunities where he initiated the offense, and they often generated good shots for the team. But he has to understand that we need much more of that in games like this, because what really was the issue in the first half was the turnovers and the lack of initiation we had. And I think Ime could do things to get him going downhill, but also just to encourage him, hey, we need you to go initiate and get us into these sets. To me, Jalen's lack of aggressiveness, I hadn't seen him this, how should I say it, not looking for his shot. Because even when he was initiating the offense, he didn't really look for his shot outside of a screen and an open three. He didn't get a drive towards the basket until the second half of this game, which is just absolutely mind blowing to me.
Well, and I'd have to go back and relook at the film, but I wonder how much of the double big lineup is clogging the paint for Jalen to actually be able to drive is the other element, because generally. Well, so that's part of it is he wasn't aggressive early, but then as the game went on and as Ime was utilizing the double big lineups, then it goes from being an option that he just didn't choose to be aggressive in attack to maybe just not even being an option at all in his mind, because you're looking at a paint that's clogged with Adams on one side of the lane and Sengun on the other side of the lane, and even if one of those guys is coming out to set the screen, you've still got so many big bodies in between, and it makes it a lot harder for him to find those seams in the defense. He did have one play, right, where he got into split two defenders, got into the teeth of the defense, and then threw the dime up. Who did he? There we go. Alperen Thompson. That's right. And so, he still has a couple drives in the game where that looked really good. So I don't know if it was just he took more of a mental back seat offensively because he knew, okay, Alpe's got it going, Amin's got it going as the release valve, Tari's got it going. I don't need to score tonight. I just need to find ways to facilitate. Maybe that was the mental approach. But at the same time, again, for Jalen being this team's leading scorer and one of the best, one of the two best offensive weapons that they have, it didn't hurt them in this game, but it's definitely hurt them in games past where he hasn't been able to get into rhythm as the game goes on. And I'm just trying to see if there's a way to identify what's kind of causing some of those slow starts, I guess.
Yeah, I feel like I feel like he kind of had gotten over those type of slow starts, but I do think he was engaged in moving the ball well when he got the ball. But I think they give up too early when he's getting denied. We need to be running that action over and over again. And when Jalen has to give the ball up early in the clock, whether there's an early double team, and it's swung to Tari Eason on the wing or Dillon Brooks on the wing, they never reset it, right? Reset that play and allow him to get back, because that's what the defense wanted. They wanted the ball out of Jalen's hands. And oftentimes Tari has this real bad where he feels like he has to make a move at that time. And with Tari, it's, sometimes you can get a good play and then sometimes you get a really tough turnover where he's just doing a little bit too much for his skill set right now. But I think that it's a team effort as well. If guys are overplaying Jalen, that means you guys have opportunities to go 3-on-4. You know what I mean? 4-on-3, right? And the ball just doesn't swing with enough velocity that honestly it should come back to Jalen on the backside when he's open for the three. And he's often open on the 3-point line with his hands up, and the ball never finds its way back to him. And it's just a lack of connective passing from this team. But Jalen in and of himself, he has to take more responsibility of getting the guys into office, especially when you have 2, 3, 4 turnovers in a row. And he also has to identify not to make bad turnovers like the Jose Alvarado when you see him compounding these plays. And he also had a really bad turnover in transition that was just really uncalled for. He just has to be better in those situations. But overall, I think those are some of the things that could really help him is just be aggressive, man. Go and also Ime, don't give up, help the other guys understand. Don't give up after they deny that first action. Go back to it, reverse it. You know what I mean? Once he gives the ball up, because that's what they want you to do. They want Tari Eason and Dillon Brooks making decisions in the middle of the floor, not Jalen Green.
Speaking of Tari Eason, we spent so much time speculating what's the starting lineup going to look like and who's Ime going to go to once Jabari's back. And surprisingly, even with Jabari Smith Jr. healthy, we're now seeing Tari Eason playing in that starting spot. And this has been a pretty consistent thing since Jabari came back from injury. Jabari's only had, I believe, one start since coming back from that injury, and it was not a good game. He didn't start. The one game that he did start was not a very solid game. I think it's only been one start, right? Or am I completely blowing this up? Was I off? Maybe it's been a couple starts. Second start in there somewhere. But Tari's been starting primarily at that 4 spot. I wonder what this is for me, man. I wonder if he just. I wonder what skill set he's looking for out of Tari Eason, or what he wants out of it, because to me, it still very much feels like this Rockets team, and this is what we talked about with the double and triple big lineups, right? The Rockets just lack so much size at times out there, and I don't know why he would opt to go for literally the smaller option at the 4 when Jabari gives you the rebounding, the length, better rim protection than Tari. Tari probably gives you better versatility and maybe slightly better on-ball defense or defensive playmaking. I don't know.
Yeah. So my theory is is one of the things that was working for the Rockets very well when they were playing, where they were performing early in the season, was the Terra Twin lineup. And I think may want those two guys on the floor at the same time, just so he has the upside. He could tap into that Terra Twin lineup early in games, and he probably is looking for more something like that. That's my guess. I don't necessarily agree with it because since Tari Eason has come back from injury, he's not been the same defensive player. He's not been that. And Tari Eason is a gambler. You know what I mean? He's an instinctual defensive player. And when you play against first lineups, these guys are going to make you pay when you make mistakes. And I often feel like Tari is a great defender. He's a good defender, but he's not there yet. He makes mistakes. He overplays at certain moments, and then he gets back cut to the rim. He misses the switch. He gets confused, or there's even moments where he just freezes and he's thinking, right? And it's too late, and now someone has created an advantage on him, and it just doesn't have the stability that it needs to be in a starting lineup. And Tari's a young player. He's coming off an injury. I hope everything's okay with that injury, because to me, he's not the lightning in the bottle he was defensively. Now, I do think he's better offensively. I think Tari's shot the ball very well. I think he's still active on the boards. I think he's still giving you a lot of what you like offensively, but defensively, there are times where Tari feels like a liability out there. There's times where he has bad fouls or he's just out of position and not rotating well. And I think Jabari is a much more stable defensive player. You won't get that lightning in the bottle that you typically see with Tari in stretches, but I think Jabari's skill set is better for the starting lineup, better for longer stretches. And you bring Tari in off the bench in limited minutes, and he has all this energy to go wild, especially on second units where you really can get guys into mistakes because they're not as proficient. And so that's how I see it.
I'm so glad you bring up that point, because we've seen, and this is what I love, is this is like the chess match that coaches are constantly playing. When I see sometimes I see somewhat more like casual NBA fans who are like, what do coaches even do? Like, it's like, this is the stuff that coaches do. Is they're sitting there like they're spending hours like trying to figure out, okay, well, how do I deploy this guy? Where can I get the most out of this guy? Like, what lineups work best? And like, I brought up this example before in the past, but like one of the things that Budenholzer used to do with Giannis in Milwaukee is he would pull Giannis early, right? Pull an early sub on Giannis, and then Giannis would come back at the end of the first quarter, and then he'd beat up on second units in those gaps where teams traditionally run their second and third string guys. And so I fully agree with you. I think that I'm on board with that idea. I think Ime is trying to recapture some of that lightning in a bottle from earlier in the season with the Terra Twins. But to your point, I don't think it works in the starting lineup, because opposing starting lineups aren't as prone to some of those mistakes that Amen and Tari were able to capitalize on when they came in as kind of that haymaker, that curveball, that changeup, whatever, in the second unit. And it feels like Ime is caught between a rock and a hard place here, because he doesn't want to bring him in Thompson out of the starting lineup. Like like he wants to keep him in the starting lineup, but the politics kind of dictate that he can't bench Dillon Brooks mid-season, even though that would be the ideal outcome here at this point, because when Dillon Brooks isn't shooting the basketball at like a 40% clip from three,
it ain't good.
He's not the best wing that the Rockets have. I would argue that he is the worst wing that the Rockets have, unless he is shooting 40% or better from three, because right now defensively, Jabari's better, Amen is better, Tari is better. They're all more versatile. They provide more size, better rebounding. Dillon is like a niche defender now, where, like, first off, again, I'll give him all the flowers in the world. He did a phenomenal job on Zion.
Yeah.
He is much better.
That's his matchup, though.
Yes, he's much better on bigger, stronger guys. Like, that's it. Literally every time that he got switched onto Alvarado at one point in the game, immediately got burnt to the rim for two. And I was like, the moment the switch happened, I was like, this is 2 points. Like, I immediately knew it was going to be 2 points. And look, this is not a slight to Dillon, right? Like, Dillon is an aggressive, tone-setting, great defender. He's got great defensive IQ. He understands, where he's supposed to be, and he does call things out for the team, and he helps set the tone defensively. But there's a level of like, I need Ime to sit Dillon down and have that conversation and be like, that video, right? You're not that guy, pal. You're not that guy. You're not that guy anymore. Like it's not like Dillon is not the ace number one defender anymore of this team. That role is now absolutely Amen Thompson's role. And it's about trying to find and mix and match the pieces around Amen. Because if you've got Amen checking the opposing team's best player, then you need the right ancillary pieces around him to complement the rest of that defensive kind of setup. And Jabari just feels like a much better complement at this point. And it doesn't seem like we're going to get Jabari back in the starting lineup this season, unfortunately, for whatever reason that is. Maybe Ime will surprise us all once he has Fred healthy again, and maybe he'll go back to the Terror Twins off the bench, and maybe he's just waiting for Fred to be back to be more of that steadying hand offensively and to kind of replicate the early season success. But the proof is in the pudding. The starting lineup that the Rockets have been running with Fred, Jalen, Dillon, Amen, and Sengun, it's bad. And there's a large enough sample size of minutes to say that lineup has absolutely struggled. And you can highlight a bunch of different reasons for it, but it feels like the sooner that they can go back to the lineup that they had earlier in the season, the better.
Yeah, I mean, I think the team is balanced better when Amon comes off the bench. And also, Amon is playing 40 minutes now. He's like playing 38, 30, and he's not able to keep that motor up at the level it was. It was generational before. Now it's just great. It's still great, but it's not that generational motor. And to me, these guys are young enough. It doesn't matter. These, Amon, you can still find 30, 32 minutes for Amon off the bench. I understand. Honestly, I think you need Dillon in the starting lineup because you just need a floor spacer. And he's been our best floor spacer all year, most consistent. And when he shoots it, I trust it. You know what I mean?
It just hurts when he gets a game like this where he goes 1 for 4, or like the other night where he went 2 for 9 or whatever. You're like, it doesn't happen often. Like, I'll give him credit, right? It's these bad shooting games are very few and far between. He had that little bit of a slump, I think, in in December going into January, if I'm not mistaken. But he has been the most reliable perimeter shooter. So you do need that spacing to open things up for Jalen and for Alp, absolutely.
And and even though he didn't shoot well from 3 today, he cleaned up in the middies. Like, he really cleaned up in the mid range, especially in the first half when we were struggling. It seemed like what we wanted Jalen to do, go get the ball and go get us a good shot. It seemed like Dillon was the guy who could do that. And it's that type of mentality is why he has to stay in the starting lineup. That type of veteran leadership, that type of fearlessness is why he has to stay in the starting lineup. And I understand that. And this is a young team, but we need the size back on the floor. Like you said, that advantage, this mismatch of two guys constantly on the boards defensively, right? We really struggled with offensive rebounds tonight and the last game. We need 2 bigs on the floor because that used to be an advantage for us. It's no longer an advantage. Rockets would out physical you in the paint. There are games where Alperen Sengun and Jabari Smith just killed teams on the offensive rebounds, right? We need another rebounder in there. Jabari stretches the floor. He's not shooting the ball well right now, but teams respect it, which means he can stay in the lineup, right? And then he has his spurts. He's still a growing young player. I think we have to bring him back for stability purposes because it works the best for our team playing well. With Tari and Amon off the bench, I know a lot of people are gonna rah about it, but it's about balance sometimes, and they balance the lineups.
We want your thoughts on everything we talked about in this episode. How do you feel about the double big, or dare I say triple big lineups that Ime Udoka is rolling out with Sengun and Adams and Jabari in there as well? What about the Rockets' inconsistent offensive production to this point? What are you hoping to see out of this team over these next few games or so? Let us know your thoughts in the YouTube comments. Madison, you know the drill. Let me know where to track you down at.
You can find me at MadmanLeaks on Twitter. Come talk Rockets basketball and NBA draft.
That's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Rockets. As always, thanks so much for checking out the show. Remember, the best way to help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing. Like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. Also, subscribe to the Locked On Rockets newsletter, link in the episode description. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.